Kia ora, ngā mihi nui kia koutou. E na rau rangatira mā, no mai, haere mai, whakatau mai, ki tēnei hui mariko. Ka Barry Coates aho, ko te kārahi o te patea whaiwhakaro. Nā reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa. Tihe Māori ora. So a very warm welcome to you all. I'm Barry Coates. I'm the founder and CEO of Mindful Money. This is the 7th seminar in our series. They're generally held on Wednesdays at 12 o'clock. We encourage you to go and have a look at previous seminars, which are all on our website, on YouTube, and on social media. So today we're talking about authenticity. The flip side of authenticity is kind of increasingly known as greenwashing. And the starting point for this conversation is the evidence of a deep suspicion from the public that there are misleading statements and exaggeration about the degree to which fund providers are ethical or sustainable or otherwise green. And our annual surveys show that more than half of the New Zealand public are concerned over this issue of greenwashing. Only this week, the Australian Securities Investment Commission, ASIC, has launched a case on investment greenwashing in Australia, following action by regulators in Europe and the United States. And in New Zealand, our local regulator, the Financial Markets Authority, has also issued reports and guidance on fund managers, encouraging them to avoid greenwashing and providing more evidence to back up claims about how green or ethical they are. So this then is a good opportunity to look from the investor's perspective rather than the regulator's perspective on how members of the public can avoid funds that mislead the investors on the degree to which there are ethical or misleading claims of ethical practice. So before we start, I should let you know that during the seminar, we're talking about some specific funds and financial advisors. However, the seminar is about investment strategies and the issue of greenwashing. It's not financial advice for any particular individual or a recommendation for any specific fund. Should you have questions or require further information, you should go and see a registered financial advisor. So in order to start us off, I want to introduce our discussants for today. I'd like to introduce Carey Church. Carey is Managing Director of Moneyworks. It's a financial advisory firm based in Cambridge. Moneyworks achieved B Corp certification last year, showing a strong commitment to social good. Carey herself trained in economics and earth sciences, also recently got a legal degree, and she has qualifications as a financial planner and ethical investment advisor. So very warm welcome to you, Carey.
Kia ora.
Carey, can you start off and tell us why you chose to specialize in ethical investment? What motivated you to do this as kind of a key part of your financial advisory practice?
Thanks, Barry. It's actually really interesting when I look at the origins of why I'm interested in what companies do. Early on in my career, from 1987 to 1989, I was really fortunate to work for one of the really big worldwide fund managers at the time called Fidelity. This is before fund management became a real thing. And I was taught that to find a company, to invest in a company, you need to go and visit the company. You need to understand what the company does. You need to talk to the management, and you need to talk to the people. You need to make sure that what management is saying is the same as what people were experiencing. That's how I was taught. And that made total sense to me. And that is Fidelity's way of looking at companies. What I saw over the years since then was a huge change in the way that investors looked at companies, particularly when the Friedman doctrine started really infiltrating. The Friedman doctrine being that the only job of companies is to make profits for their shareholders. During the 1990s, we set up Moneyworks in 1997. I got more and more concerned, annoyed at the fact that the whole of investing was focusing on quarterly reporting, on profits and not people. And before that, people had been important. Then we saw the whole trend towards passive funds, where the investment metrics were purely about profit. I mean, some passive funds these days, I was looking at one the other day, it's actually a sustainable fund, labeled a sustainable fund. It has 5,000 companies in it, and there are only 58,000 listed companies in the world. And there is no way that anybody can understand what that company is actually doing when you've got 5,000 companies in a fund. Overlaid with that, we had clients from our very first days in 1997 asking us for ethical investing. In about 5 years ago, in 2019, Peter and I went on a cycling trip of Borneo. And in Borneo, there were two things in particular that really sort of pushed us. One was all the pollution on the beaches, all the plastic that had been washed up because it's on a major trade route and across the sea from China. And the second thing was all of the palm oil forest deforestation, the deforestation to be able to plant palm oil trees and the impact it had on the orangutans. That was kind of a push. And after sort of having these things bubbling away in our minds, in 2020, we made the real commitment and started the study and started the transition. We've actually run all of our clients through our process that we developed using Mindful Money's research. And surprisingly, everyday people love what we're doing. It's not just the tree-hugging greenies.
Yeah, that's a really interesting issue. It echoes our surveys that we do. So every year we do surveys of the New Zealand public to ask questions about what people think of ethical investment. And the interesting thing is that the profile of people who are interested in ethical investment is not just young people who are active on climate change or environment. It's actually a range, and particularly there's a lot of older people, over 60-year-olds, who are passionate about the environment, about sustainability, about climate change. And I think for many, it's a legacy issue of wanting to leave a world which is perhaps these days could be described as a survivable world, as opposed to a world that has massive problems as a result of our generation. So I think people are kind of wanting, to look beyond their lifetimes and say, how can we give our kids and our grandkids a decent world that we bequeath to them? So that's interesting, because obviously those are investors often with substantial amounts of money to invest.
Yeah.
Other interesting issues, heavily skewed towards women, and actually across income levels. It's often perceived that you have to be wealthy to afford to do ethical investment, which is by no means true. And I guess we can talk about the returns to ethical investment, but certainly you're not sacrificing returns in order to invest ethically. Often, far from it, you can often earn higher returns. So that appeals to people of all income levels, and I guess the final kind of demographic that I find really interesting is that people's initial starting point is often about wanting to align with their values. We get a really strong kind of response from New Zealand public when people say, I want to avoid those companies which are not aligned with my values. Are those the kind of characteristics that you see in your clients?
Well, just 2 points there. I just want to make a comment on the returns. When we had clients asking us in 1997, a handful of clients that are tree-hugging greenies, ask us about investing. We couldn't find funds, and the funds that we did find did not give the returns. That has totally changed. In the last 5-7 years, it has changed to the extent that the consistently top performing fund in New Zealand last year was a purely ethical fund, even though fossil fuels and weapons were the cool investments last year because of Putin's invasion of Ukraine. Going back to the values, we actually did quite a bit of analysis. So what we did was we asked our clients to rank each of the mindful money, what we call nasties, their categories, their 10 categories, based on how comfortable they were in investing in them. They gave them a score of 1, comfortable, 2, prefer not, and 3, no exposure if possible. So we asked every single client last year, and we asked every single new client. When we did the analysis, and this reflected our experience, even when we went in to see people said, no, not interested in that, just want a return, not interested in all this, airy-fairy stuff. When we actually asked them, the score, remember we have 1, 2, and 3. When we averaged the score for human rights violations was 2.84. So all of our clients pretty much wanted to avoid investing in companies that cause human rights violations or environmental damage. The scores were really high for animal testing or animal welfare as well, and for weapons. But people weren't quite as worried about alcohol. That was like 1.2 as an average score. Basically, the comment we had was, I can't be hypocritical because I enjoy alcohol. But even the die-hard people did not want to invest in human rights. Die-hard, it's profit, it's profit, it's profit. Didn't want to invest in companies that did bad things to humans and the environment.
As you know, Carey, that's really consistent with the results of the public survey. So, for example, the top-rated issue is not wanting to invest in companies that violate human rights, and that's over 90% in 4 years in a row in our surveys. Over 4 years, these results have been remarkably stable. And when we started this, people said, well, everyone has their own ideas of values and ethics. And in fact, that's true, but there's far more commonality than most people would realize, that actually across different people, they want to avoid the same kind of issues. So that is one of the reasons that Mindful Money define these issues of concern, the kind of things that the New Zealand public consistently say they don't want to invest in. And our approach has been to then provide the public with the information about what investments are in each of those 10 categories of issues of concern. Transparency is a good thing, and we make this information freely available to the public. I think most people would say it's very accessible and easy to use. But the intention has always been that we would also kind of want that information to be available to financial advisors such as yourself. We've found that financial advisors don't always use this information as intensively as we thought they would. You've described it as kind of important in your analysis. Can you give us a context for how you do your research and analysis on funds to say what's an ethical fund, what isn't an ethical fund, how does it meet clients' wishes?
I will, but I'll just make a comment about financial advisors using the research to start off with. I've been learning a lot more about how people in our industry, remember, I've been doing this since 1985, 86. So I've been around the industry for a long time. I've been taught that people and understanding the company is really important. Many people that are newer to the industry they haven't been taught that. They don't necessarily understand that. I had a really interesting conversation at a conference last week with an advisor who I have huge respect for. And he started talking to me about climate change and about how he felt that ethical investing was all about climate change, and he didn't really know how that related to other things. I just want to say, and I'm spending quite a bit of time doing this, it's not actually about these big topics up the top. It's about you and who you are as a person and who you believe. So I'm going to be spending quite a bit of time teaching financial advisors to start from the bottom, to start from the client rather than starting from the top and trying to convince people. It comes from within. How we do it, we are very, very fortunate that Mindful Money permitted us to engage them as a research provider 3 years ago now. And Mindful Money, we use the publicly available research that the Trust produces for New Zealand, on New Zealand funds. We also pay Mindful Money to analyse our Australian-based funds. What happens is when we get that information twice a year from Mindful Money. And we've then built a machine behind that where we can analyse to the cent what exposure each individual client actually has. So it's a big data crunching process, and we can produce it in their annual review or in their financial plan. We can actually show what exposure by bar chart they have to each of the nasties, each of the 10 different categories, and then to the cent, and then we can tell them what the 10 biggest nasty companies we have. That's the first stage. That's actually really easy now that we've built the machine. The hard thing is then understanding what those companies are doing, understanding why they've been tagged as a nasty, understanding more about the individual companies and whether they're actually doing good, but they've been tagged because of the research process, and then communicating that with our clients and talking to our clients about their values. We're doing a big education. So we rolled out that whole process last year. This year, we're doing a big education process with our clients because education is a core part of Moneyworks offering and always has been. And we're teaching people about what's happening in the world of animal testing at the moment, because pretty much all of our clients will have some exposure to animal testing in their portfolio. We're also side by side teaching them about how fund managers work. So we're teaching them about how a top-down investing fund manager makes their decision and makes their choices. So a lot of the work we do is then going to the next step and looking at the companies and looking at what they're doing so that we can understand and explain, and engaging with the fund managers and saying to the fund managers, why are you investing in this company when it's been labelled as a nasty? And that's actually really helped us with our relationships with our fund managers, and fund managers who don't want to engage with us aren't necessarily still on our recommended list, because that is a really important part of our role, our active engagement with our fund manager.
So, as you say, there are reasons why fund managers may invest still in something where the public has concerns. So a good example is always Unilever. Unilever tests its products on animals when it sells into China. And it does that because at the moment, that's a regulation required by the Chinese government. Other cosmetics companies don't sell to China and don't test their products on animals. So we record Unilever as a company that tests their products on animals. But in other ways, Unilever is quite a sustainable company and does good work on sustainable supply chains, etc. So there are always judgment calls in these issues about how much you care about an issue like animal welfare versus how much you care about other characteristics of a company.
Let's expand on that a little bit. Using the animal testing and the cosmetics companies, yes, there are definitely cosmetic companies that choose not to distribute in China, but they do tend to be the smaller ones. And for global investment managers, they may not be as accessible or not be as liquid to be able to put into their portfolios. But some of the research that we've done, a great example that I've found, I think it's a great example, is L'Oreal, who's in one of our fund managers' portfolios. And yes, they do distribute products in China. So yes, they have to pay for animal testing by the authorities in China to be able to do that, because that's currently the law, although it's gradually changing. But the other thing that L'Oreal do, and they've done for many, many years, is that they do a lot of work and research on replacing animal testing. They've actually developed one of the 2 artificial human skin replacements that people can use, that companies can use instead of animals. It's called EpiSkin. The other one's called Epiderm. So although they're tagged with animal testing, they're doing good things. They're pushing back. They're looking at alternatives, even though the laws in China do apply to them. And I mean, I love this statistic. They actually make 2 humans worth of skin every month for the market to be able to be sold. So there are really good things happening out there. The other thing, just changing categories a bit and talking about weapons. Weapons is a very close to 3 as well with our clients, people who don't want exposure. We've got 2 portfolios. We've got our ethical portfolio, which is 100%. Yep, we don't want any nasties and we'll get rid of as many as we can. Then we've got the hybrid portfolio, which many of our clients are in, where it is still extremely ethical, but there are a few fund managers in there that we still really like, who get exposure by active engagement. So they actually engage with the company and get them to change. One of those examples is a favorite fund manager of ours in the hybrid portfolio. And I was really appalled about 6 months ago when I saw that they'd added a company called Safran to their portfolio. And Safran produces engines and replacement parts. It's a French company, and replacement parts for aircraft. Big, profitable company. And I was concerned because I knew that they had some exposure to weapons and that they were, like a bad company. So I engaged with the fund manager, and they taught me a lot, and I did a lot of research on my own. And I discovered that 8% of the revenue of the company is involved with weapons. 1% of the company is involved with a joint venture that Safran has with Airbus to supply materials for the nuclear weapons for the French military. So all up, 9% of Safran has an exposure to weapons. So that's the first point. So yes, they are a nasty. But using our analytics, what we can then show for a company is, even though that is 9% of Safran, Safran is only 1.74% of that fund manager's investments. And that fund manager is only 5% of our client's allocation. So if a client has $100,000, the exposure is only $783. So for somebody in our hybrid portfolio, they know that that's what the exposure is. They understand it. But for someone in our ethical portfolio, that just wouldn't work. And instead, we use another fund manager, actually Pathfinder, whose policy on weapons is we don't know whether the weapons have been used by good actors or by bad actors, and it could change. So we just have no exposure whatsoever.
It's interesting on nuclear weapons. When we started Mindful Money in 2019, we did an analysis of how much of New Zealand investors' money in KiwiSaver and retail investment funds was invested in companies that manufacture nuclear weapons.
Yeah.
It was 130 million in around 100 different funds. We went back to those fund managers repeatedly and said, we don't think you should be investing in manufacturing nuclear weapons. Over time, that first dropped to a year later to 52 million. then down to 15 million, and now is below 10 million. So this process of going back to fund managers and saying, look at what you're invested in, and look at what the public feels comfortable with in terms of their investment, I think is a good process. And it's one of the reasons why we feel good as Mindful Money, that we're actually helping to direct money away from the more harmful activities and importantly towards the things that make a positive difference.
Yeah.
But Carey, I wanted to pick you up on this issue of engagement and stewardship. So we find that actually avoiding things is part of the story. And some fund managers have other strategies, and those strategies include engaging with companies to improve their performance. And recently, there's been a new stewardship code in New Zealand giving guidance for good practice to do that. We include some information on the Mindful Money website, but we're going to include more in future. And we do a number of seminars on this series about stewardship and engagement. It's important. How do you look at funds around stewardship? What kind of information are you looking at, and how are you able to ensure that the information is really kind of valid? Because lots of people say they engage with companies, but actually it's not always clear as to A, whether that's real engagement, and B, whether it actually makes a difference in terms of company policies.
So there are a few things here. There's proxy voting versus active engagement, which are two different things. We believe that it is a fund manager's responsibility to represent their investors by exercising their proxy voting. So this is their vote every year on issues that have come up. We believe it's our responsibility to actively engage with our fund managers as well. And so one of the first things that we're looking at is how our fund managers have represented that, how they've reported on it, and we're working towards getting all of the fund managers that we still recommend to report that on their website, but to report it in a meaningful way so that we can understand what the outcomes are. Now, often proxy votes are just about executive remuneration or board composition, but they're increasingly getting more and more about whether the company should be doing more reporting on climate change. But there can be any number of issues. So that's one side, and that's really about data analysis. The main thing is whether companies are truly actively engaging. And there may be companies who don't have the power or the influence to actively engage. And in that case, we would want them to not have exposures. But we only believe, we do a lot of research and a lot of analysis to find out if they are actually actively engaging and how they're actively engaging. For example, Peter and I met with one of our favorite fund managers who's not an don't brand themselves as an ethical fund manager, but everything they do puts them into the ethical fund management category. And they have 5 to 6 company meetings every week of the year, and they know their companies really well, and they're continually talking to them, and they're continually raising issues where it doesn't fit with their values, their personal values. Another example is, actually I've got so many examples, but what we want to see is when a fund manager is saying they actively engage, we want to understand who they've actively engaged with and what the outcome has been. I've actually read 2 fantastic impact reports in the last month, both actually from New Zealand fund managers, say that give us a lot of detail about the engagement that they've done and the change that they've made. One of them actually gives us a story, which I will be writing up in our newsletter, about an organisation where they actively engaged and they didn't see any change, so they divested, they sold. But reading these reports gives you a lot of information, but there are also a lot of fund managers who say they actively engage and you just know it's not possible because they're too small. And a really good example of that is the New Zealand Super Fund Facebook Christchurch call. situation where they were a big fund manager. They got a lot of other fund managers involved, and they still couldn't get Google or Alphabet to engage with them.
That story of the New Zealand super funds engagement with Facebook or Meta was really instructive, and more power to the super fund for commissioning an external evaluation to help them understand what outcomes had come out of that. As you said, the outcomes were limited, still kind of important for them to do, but given the political backing they had from New Zealand Prime Minister, French Prime Minister, President, etc., still not being able to achieve much is kind of, in a way, I guess a sort of reminder of how difficult it is to change companies that don't want to change. And we had a seminar recently, and one of the conclusions was that where companies are on a path to change and willing to change, investors can really help support and in some cases accelerate that process. But it's hard to do if it's a company that has an inherently harmful business model and won't change. And so one of the things that we're doing in Mindful Money, as well as making some of this information about stewardship and proxy voting, etc., available to the public, we're also differentiating in fossil fuel companies, for example, between the fossil fuel companies who are still increasing their exploration and production and being part of the problem, as opposed to those who are transitioning towards renewable energy on a pathway consistent with a 1.5 degree transition pathway. And that's so we'll make that information available on our website, and it's a kind of way where this kind of information can also help the public to be able to have access to some of this data that you generate as a financial advisor. Carey, one of the other strategies for fund managers is that they invest often in better companies, in companies that make a positive impact in society, either for the environment or climate change or society. Can you tell us how you look at that and your information sources, and what kind of analysis you do to be able to assess, what are the real positives in a portfolio? Because our survey showed that's where people want to invest, but there aren't a lot of options available to them as retail investors at this time.
At the moment, it's difficult because of the non-consistency in reporting. A number of our fund managers, or most of our fund managers, most of our shares fund managers in our ethical portfolio map what they're doing, map the companies they're investing into the UN SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals. So they choose that they say, what are the good things that this company is doing, to map them to that. It's really hard to get consistency at the moment. So that's kind of, getting into more detail is a future project when there is more data available. But at the moment, we have minimum standards for inclusion in an ethical portfolio, and in both of our portfolios, in our hybrid and our ethical portfolio. And we're looking for fund managers who are already mapping the companies to the SDGs or are working on mapping them to the SDGs. So that seems to be the most common outcome at the moment.
As you say, it's sometimes difficult to distinguish between companies who are working on an issue like investing in the water sector versus whether they're making a really positive impact, for example, and people providing drinking water to people who don't have access to safe drinking water, or whether it's something that may even have a harmful impact in the water sector. So, but there is some emerging good practice on that. And,
but again, that comes back to us knowing our fund managers well and spending a lot of time talking to our fund managers and understanding what they're actually doing. It takes a lot of work. but it is worth it to understand. And there are examples of, an example of a company that is doing good is a company called Vestas, which is a Danish company that makes wind turbines. So they make wind turbines out of all the steel and mechanical stuff, and the wind turbines only have a life of 20 to 50 years, and then you've got to work out what to do with them. Vestas, just like L'Oreal, are putting a lot of research and work into working out how to recycle, reuse the parts of the wind turbines. So that's actually a company that's really investing in the circular economy. But it's case studies. And it's, the very minimum is that going back to my days at Fidelity, is that our fund managers understand what they're investing in and what the companies are doing, and they talk to them and know what's happening.
Yeah. Just as a final issue, and we're running out of time a bit, is, people are obviously kind of aware that there's a relationship between investing and climate change. And we did some calculations to say that actually the amount of the average Kiwi saver that finances emissions is one of the biggest part of an individual's footprint. So you have footprint through your electricity use, your car, or your air travel or water use, etc. But actually one of the pieces of that footprint that people generally don't take account of is how their investment finances emissions from companies that they're invested in. And so, there are ways for fund managers to reduce their emissions and to be able to have an impact on the climate in a positive way. And obviously there are some that make a pledge to drive those emissions down towards zero. But we did a survey of the New Zealand investment sector recently, and it showed that this is still quite rare amongst fund managers. We're behind Australia, well behind the EU in funds taking action on climate change. How do you build that into your analysis? And is this something that your clients are concerned about, possibly more concerned since the past few weeks?
Well, Barry, we're waiting for you to get the metrics up on your website so that we can integrate it. We actually tried. We spent ages in 2021 looking at all of the statistics and numbers that were coming out. And honestly, it's a nightmare, because at the moment they report in different, one company will report in US dollars per metric ton, another one will report in Australian dollars or New Zealand dollars. It's a nightmare to get consistency. So we've actually pushed that one out to 2025, and we've said by 2025, with the TCFD reporting requirements on our fund managers, there is going to have to be some consistency, and the XRBs, giving people a framework, even though that will be the first reporting. But again, it comes down to the individual fund managers and understanding what they're doing. One of our fund managers, an outstanding ethical fund manager, not only measures their businesses, their internal businesses emissions, and works towards that being net zero or neutral, and doing things, so they're doing a lot in there, but they also measure the emissions on the portfolios, and they pay to offset those, which is just incredible, absolutely incredible. But in terms of us reporting them, it's just too hard to measure, because there's just no consistency at the moment. So it's more just understanding, being aware, learning.
And hopefully the information that we have on Mindful Money about the different types of fossil fuel companies, for example, will help people be able to recognize where companies are on a kind of good pathway to net zero, and when they're more part of the problem.
Yeah.
So but across the rest of the economy, that's tougher. And as you say, we're all wrestling with how to provide properly comparable information on how different companies are doing, how different funds are doing. So I guess that's a kind of watch this space.
It is.
Carey, thank you so much for joining us on this seminar and for the work that you do. I think Moneyworks is doing a fantastic job by being so analytical and research driven and providing great service for your clients. It's terrific that you've joined us to talk about that. So thank you very much.
Really enjoyed talking to you. Thank you. Hero.
Great. Thanks to the audience for joining us, and many more people watch these on video than directly live. So thank you both to the video watchers or even the podcast listeners, as well as those who are on live. So this would not be possible. These seminars would not be possible without the support of some of our generous sponsors. So I wanted to give a shout out to Alphinity, which is a Australian fund recently available in New Zealand to retail investors. Mass Medical Assurance Society, Mercer, the New Zealand Green Investment Finance, silver sponsors Chapman Tripp, Booster, Harbour and Trustees Executors, and bronze sponsors Pathfinder and Pi Funds. So thanks very much to all of those. Thanks again to you, Carey, and to our audience. Next seminar up, we're planning to do one on forests, to look at the issues of forest policy reform in the wake of the problems of slash and Tairāwhiti and Hawke's Bay in particular, but also to look at the issue of where we should be planting native forests and how we can regenerate our native forests to not only sequester carbon, but also support biodiversity in New Zealand. So I'm really looking forward to that seminar. It's coming up soon, so keep an eye on this Crowdcast channel, and we'll let you know on email. You can join Mindful Money's mailing list by going onto our website. It's always a good way to get information about what we're doing and what events are coming up. So a final comment, Carey and I have been talking about investing ethically. We've given some of the reasons for doing so. You feel good about your investment. It does good in the world, and it earns good returns. The question, as actually the head of the biggest asset manager, BlackRock, said, a question is no longer why should you invest ethically, it's why not. So thanks very much. I hope you follow up. You go and see a financial advisor, or go and check out Mindful Money. Stay active, invest mindfully. Mā te wā. Thanks for joining.